Hello and welcome to a new and exciting episode of the Space Curious podcast. I'm your host, I'm Terry, and I have with me a fantastic guest, Aleksander Lidtke. And the topic of the conversation for today is we are talking about space debris, the invisible threat invisible threat that is orbiting above us. This podcast is hosted and supported by DE Orbit, who is a recruitment business part of Daniel Ernest. So we are in the recruitment business game. So if you have any requirements, please do get in contact with us and we'll be here to help. But now over to the man himself, the main attraction. Alec, a question to yourself, just kicking this off, is first of all, welcome to the podcast. And if you can tell us a little bit about yourself, what do you do and how do you do it?
All right. Thanks for the invitation, and thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure. As for myself, I did a PhD at the University of Southampton more than 10 years ago now in the field of space debris. I was bridging the gap between operational collision avoidance, which every spacecraft does, but I can talk to you more about this later, and also large-scale pollution debris modeling. If you will, this is kind of trying to bridge the gap between daily weather forecasting as well as climate modeling, but when it as applies to space debris. I currently work at Astroscale Holdings, which is the holdings company of this global entity or holdings entity of this global company that's working towards making space sustainable through provision of in-orbit services, which, by the way, also includes active debris removal, which we can talk about more later as well.
Love it.
I report directly to the CTO. I'm responsible for managing and developing key technologies related to how we know where the spacecraft are, how we predict where they're going to be, making sure they don't collide with anything, and also trying to calculate the maneuvers that we need to make in order to fulfill our mission in a nutshell.
Love it. Absolutely love it. And how did you start your journey in the space industry? How did it begin? What was that spark of inspiration, that knowledge that someone passed to you, or a film or book that got you into it?
Well, for me, it really started by choosing my undergrad degree, the aerospace engineering, specializing with spacecraft engineering. What had led to that, it's kind of difficult to pinpoint because it was not really a theme that many people would. I don't actually think I know anyone else from my high school or even primary school or any other school
Wow.
at that time that would choose the same direction, if you will. So it was something really novel at the time, especially in my. I suppose it's always been the traveling books that I loved. I remember very vividly when Mars Pathfinder landed, even though I was just a little kid at the time. I remember that being a big event that I definitely committed to memory. I always liked traveling and discovering new things. So that was probably it.
Absolutely love it. Yeah. So, and again, so setting the scene with space debris, the invisible threat with the stuff orbiting and going overhead, obviously to someone like me who's a novice and I'm the uninitiated. This is why I'm so curious because I always ask the questions, the whys, the what's, the hows. And this is why I'm bringing on experts like yourself who know it. So I'm learning from you. So, and for the audience as well, when we hear space debris, what actually does that mean when we all people throw that term out there, but what does space debris actually mean?
Well, I don't, frankly speaking, know what people imagine. It's a very wide spectrum of different types of objects, varying from tiny particles like, millimeter kind of size, the slag from rocket engines, nuts and bolts, and going to larger paint flakes and things like this, all the way up to, massive intact spacecraft or upper stages from rockets, which are, size of a bus. That's pretty much all of that entails space debris.
Right. So we've literally got the nuts and bolts flying around us, orbiting or whatever that word may be above us. And I guess obviously lost in space. And this is why people like yourself are now thinking, right, okay, we need to do something about it. So how would you explain space debris to someone with absolutely no background or in aerospace?
Right. Okay. So those objects are in orbit. So, they're circling the Earth constantly because if they ever stop, they will basically fall back onto the ground and potentially burn out in the atmosphere, which
Wow.
does happen. Actually, roughly 1, 2, or 3 objects we enter the atmosphere every day, large objects, becoming a growing problem, but that's a completely separate story. Very graphically, I told you that, space debris is, a whole range of different types of objects, from very small to very big. So
Yes.
graphically, the way I think about it, it's, if you imagine an orbit where your satellite is located as a motorway, space debris is just basically, a lot of trash laying on this motorway. Old tires you've probably seen, maybe some broken pieces of cars, broken pieces of chassis, sometimes even wrecks of entire cars, which quite rarely, but you do see also. Typically, pushed to the side of the road, but in case of orbit, nobody's moving that stuff, so it's basically left wherever everybody left it.
Yeah.
In a sort of more functional way, I tend to think of space debris as greenhouse gases in the atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically a side effect of human activity, which does affect our society and which we need to mitigate and manage somehow. So there's basically this duality, one way you can think about it.
Yeah. And that's a great analogy, just going back what you said to the motorway, because I didn't even think about it like this, because like I said, I'm learning from people like yourself, because for the audience and the listeners, I think, okay, so what's actually happening? But the way that you eloquently explained it, it's like being on the motorway and some car may have a blowout, or there may be a bumper may fall off, or someone may throw some trash out. Obviously, we're not doing that in space, but someone may throw something out there. So we literally will sit on the motorway and it will get shifted to the side. And so obviously we've got the highway in space, but at the moment, the technology, correct me if I'm wrong, the technology has not caught up with that yet for people to actually be physically, or a machine to be physically there to clean it up and take away the space junk at a rate that we need to.
Well, okay, first of all, going back to this thing that you said about throwing garbage into space or motorways. Now, people obviously throw garbage onto motorways, which we shouldn't do, but people do it. And previously, people also used to throw away pieces of spacecraft in orbit and just leave them there without any regard whatsoever for what's going to happen to this piece further down the line. So for the last couple decades, let's say 20, 30 years, there have been laws enacted and standards implemented to try and mitigate the growth of space debris, call them debris mitigation guidelines, basically, and standards implemented. And one of the things that they say, do not throw anything out, like keep everything attached to your spacecraft, because obviously if it's very small, it's very difficult to track. So once throw away a nut or a bolt or a spanner or whatever, that's going to be very, very hard to find later on and avoid cross collisions. Now, when it comes to the technology to remove objects, it didn't really exist, say, 15 years ago. That's more or less when I started my PhD, and incidentally, when also Astroscale, the company I work at, was founded. It was really, kind of science fiction to imagine cleaning up space debris at the time, but we've been catching up with technology quite rapidly. And as a matter of fact, right now, we already have a mission in our hangar, in our clean room, that's going to launch and try and remove a piece of space debris from orbit. There are other companies doing the same thing as well. So right now it's a bit of a race to see who's going to be able to do it first. Governments have done it already, primarily to demonstrate their capabilities to their adversaries. So I would say the technology is definitely catching up.
Yeah, definitely. And what you've just said makes complete sense about other companies doing it. And for us, that's great, because competition always creates innovation. So if someone else is doing it, we want to race to be the best, the safest, the cleanest, the quickest, the most cost effective. So what your companies do, Astroscale, what you're doing is obviously fantastic. So yeah, thank you very much for obviously explaining that. Another question that I had, sorry if I've already asked this, is how much debris is actually orbiting Earth today? I know it's a big, wide question, but it's something that I wanted to know.
Yeah, but it's an interesting question as well. So, going back to this different scale of sizes, the smaller the pieces, the more of them there are. We can only track objects which are more or less, a fist in size, so 5 centimeters, 10 centimeters across. So, and of these kind of objects that we can regularly track, there's about 30,000 right now. And, the smaller you go in size, the more of them there become. So there's about 1 million of objects larger than 1 centimeter, 100 million larger than 1 millimeter, and so on.
Wow.
So So
Yeah.
yeah, it just really depends on the size of the object.
Yeah. And again, another selfish question, but I'm sure this is what the civilians like myself want to know is at what speed are these objects traveling at and where do they actually go?
Okay, so we did touch on this earlier, but they are in orbit, so they have to move at orbital speed, or they will fall out onto the ground. So orbital speed for low Earth orbit, so up to 2,000 kilometers altitude, is about 7 to 7.5 kilometers per second. Obviously, there's still some, well, maybe not obviously, but there's still some residual atmosphere at these kind of altitudes up to a few hundred kilometers. So even though they're in orbit and they're basically flying around the Earth every 90 minutes or so, they gradually lose speed due to the air resistance. So obviously, there's not anywhere near as much resistance as here. But if you imagine taking a ball and throwing it, it will eventually fall on the ground due to the gravity, but also due to satellites do experience atmospheric drag as well. And eventually, they will lose this velocity, lose altitude, and eventually they will burn up in the atmosphere, or some pieces might even survive and hit the ground. Because a lot of really scary looking pictures of huge metal tanks hitting the ground and a massive crater, which is, as I said, a problem as well, because
Yeah.
so far none of these things has ever killed anybody, but it's probably a matter of time. And
Yeah.
also the fact that those things burn up in the atmosphere. There's a lot
Yeah.
of chemicals being released at higher layers of the atmosphere or stratosphere, and that, frankly speaking, we don't even know what it's going to do to our environment.
The environment, the earth, and also the ocean, because I can only, this is a guess, this is my personal guess, is a lot of it must be splashing down in the oceans as well as in oceans. And that we're potentially not recording. So it may be more than what we are saying because most of it is lost in the ocean. And
Yeah,
that yeah, that's just my thought process.
sure.
And well, again, another question is why should anyone care? Why should we care about space debris? To the people who say, well, I've got my bills, I've got my mortgage, I just want to go on holiday. Why should I be thinking about space debris?
Well, I would say that mortgage and bills to pay are definitely, the more that needs to get. And frankly speaking, on the global scale, there may be more immediate threats to us. That said, space debris is definitely an important one. The way I see this is kind of similar to how I view technology and the internet and computing and so on. So if you think about it, nowadays, most businesses, if not all, are in one way or another connected to technology. Right? Everybody's using computers, everybody's using internet, and so on. In the same way, the connection to space is being built at the same time right now. So soon, okay, already there are many businesses running and they rely on space, and this number is only going to increase as we go forward. So things like Uber, Lyft, etc. I mean, you might not think of them as companies that have anything to do with space, but if you think about it for a second, all of them rely on navigation that comes from space, and and you could basically draw this parallel even further. So space is not like a remote and separate location, a separate domain. That has no influence whatsoever on what happens on the ground and to human activity. So it's very, very interrelated to a couple
Yes.
episodes ago. It was a great episode with about telecommunications where we actually explored this topic a lot. So I think I would just recommend listeners and viewers to go back and rewatch it. Because I think we explored this topic pretty well there.
Yeah, we'll get a link for that. So when this show goes live, we'll attach a link as well so people can obviously find that as well.
Right. And also, if we are supposed to, so, economy being one thing, but also, if we want to tackle global challenges, we need to have a global means to do this, to address them. So things like climate change, climate monitoring, population growth, wealth and income and digital divides, those things can and are being addressed with satellites. And also on a more national level, satellites are essential nowadays to national security, and that's perhaps one thing that we should not forget about as well.
Yeah,
So, plenty of reasons why space is important.
exactly, because we're all consumers, and like you said, no matter how little we think we use it, we do. If you got a mobile phone, you're a part of the consumption. If you use satellite navigation in your car, in your phone, on any other device, you're part of the consumption. Anything from your mobile phone network. Again, we all complain that we want connectivity, we want clearer, crystal connectivity. So that comes with technology. And at the moment, this is the best way or the best solution for us, which is putting these satellites around Earth to make sure we have the comfort in our own home. So thank you very much for that. I really, really appreciate you explaining that. I've lost my train of thought now. So I'll go on to what parts of our everyday lives rely on satellites. You mentioned GPS. You mentioned I think you was gonna. I'm not sure if you did mention banking, but what other parts of satellites is important to us that we take for granted?
Right. Okay. So navigation or GNSS or GPS, if you will, yeah, that we discussed before. This is currently not so affected by space debris because the navigation satellites are located at a pretty high altitude, and it's not highly used orbit. Obviously, it's highly used for navigation, but it's quite special. So if people want to launch their satellites to observe the Earth, they go either higher or lower, much higher or much lower, and so on. So for now, it's not really it's not affected by space debris, I don't think. Although, if you fast forward some decades, it probably will be. And we're trying to lay some groundwork to be able to address this problem. You did mention banking.
Yeah.
So banking itself doesn't really use satellites, but it does rely on precise timing, which comes from the navigation satellites. So whatever affects the navigation satellites will affect banking as well. Because you need this very, very precise timing information to, record when the transactions happen, when money moves from one place to the other, and so on.
Yeah. Okay.
And very soon, new constellation will be put in place called Telesat Lightspeed, which is going to be providing super accurate, super secure communications for banking and so on. And that could be affected by space debris as well.
Okay. Weather forecasts. I guess you touched on that already.
Totally, yeah. All the satellites that are 90% of the satellites that are used for weather forecasting are quite low. So they are basically flying through a huge cloud of space debris all the time.
Okay.
Some of them are located really high up at the geostationary orbit, which is not as dense, but is also affected by debris as well.
And television?
Well, it really depends on how you get your television. When I was a kid, we used to have the satellite dish that would point, towards the geostationary orbit and try to, make sure we get a reception. So that could be affected by space debris, but obviously, if you get it from the internet, probably not really.
Right. Okay. And emergency services?
We do use satellites for track aircraft, ships, and so on to collect the so-called AIS data, which is basically the automatic identification system. So, if a plane crashes or a ship starts to sink, they can press a red button and then this immediately alerts the emergency services and they respond. So that's definitely going to be affected by space debris. And frankly speaking, even some iPhones these days can do this. So they can connect to Iridium satellites and send some simple emergency messages as well.
Wow. So literally like an SOS message would be pinpointed or ping the phone. Okay, I never knew that. And this is why I love having conversations with experts, because it helps my knowledge as well. And hopefully the viewers, the listeners are really understanding and loving the amount of knowledge that you're sharing across the board, and obviously reaching out to the audience. I'm not too sure if I've asked this or not, so let me know if I've not. The internet as well. What's the situation with internet, satellites? Are we using it? Is it merging?
Well, some of the internet, so that's obviously deep down in the ocean or somewhere buried underground, so that's not going to be affected. But parts of the internet, and that's an increasing trend right now, are being routed through satellites. So I think everybody has heard of Starlink. There's Amazon as well. Eutelsat OneWeb as well, and some other constellations from other countries being put in place right now. So obviously those will be affected and will actually are already affected by space debris.
Yeah. And like to because obviously there's the excitement part of it as well, which is fantastic. But I obviously would always go to the yin and the yang just to make sure we are super aware of what's going on. So the scale of the problem or the scale of the situation, whatever way you want to phrase it, is there a problem? Is it noticeably getting worse with debris?
Well, so yeah, when I did my PhD, some years ago already, that already was being known as a problem. In fact, first paper that stipulated that space debris would become a problem dates back to 1960s.
Wow.
Yeah, but to be honest with you, I did talk about the parallel to global warming or climate change. The first papers that stipulated that greenhouse gas emissions will become a problem date to the same period, more or less.
Mm.
So, we have this awareness of the problem that might occur, but it hasn't really materialized. So is space debris a problem? So far, we've been quite lucky that no piece of space junk has killed anyone when re-entering the Earth. There have not been that many collisions on orbit, although there have been some, and they keep happening all the time. So not only the things collide in orbit, but also old leftover satellites sometimes explode because there's a short circuit somewhere in the battery, or the fuel can explode as well. So right now, people have been trying to as I said, mitigate the debris problem by, for example, venting the propellant tanks, disconnecting the batteries, and repassivating the satellites after the end of life, making sure that they try to lower their orbit when the satellite is no longer needed to make sure that we enter the atmosphere. But, then this creates potential problems on the ground.
Yeah.
We've been launching more and more things into the orbit, especially if you look at the last couple of years, 5 to 10, the number of objects and mass in orbit has increased dramatically.
Mm.
And that's potentially a problem. A lot of those things that we launch nowadays are satellites that belong to mega constellations, some of which we already mentioned. And they try to avoid other pieces of debris and other satellites and each other's, not to cause collisions. And so far, touch wood, they've been very successful at this. It is getting very, very crowded up there, and it's kind of shocking, but there is not a lot of coordination when it comes to the rules of the road globally. So, even though, one constellation from one operator might be able to avoid collisions with everything else, if you take your satellite and you want to fly through that constellation, they might not know where you're going to be, and they might not be able to avoid you. And so that creates a risk of colliding with space. And that's a big problem. I actually attended a conference a couple of weeks ago. All of the big operators were really complaining. It's a huge problem because not only does it endanger the space environment, but also endangers their constellation.
Exactly. And I guess that. Mm-hmm.
And okay, we've been getting much better at making sure we don't leave debris behind. So we apply those mitigation measures. But still, nevertheless, there are satellites and upper stages of rockets and so on that get abandoned in orbit.
Yeah,
and that problem is still there.
Yeah, let's hope we put our brains together and we figure this out quick because there's a lot of momentum going on to obviously launch more. So on the debris side, where is most of the debris actually coming from?
So I just checked the most recent data the other day, and it is roughly an even split between active and dead satellites, which we collectively call payloads, rocket bodies, and fragments. So there have been collisions in orbit, which I mentioned. There have been explosions in orbit. There have been intentional collisions caused by weapon tests. People different countries have been developing weapons to shoot down adversary satellites.
Yeah.
They have demonstrated that they can do this in a couple of places, and all of those pieces are still in orbit. And obviously, as we mentioned, there's been a big increase in the number of mega constellations and the satellites that are part of those, and so they are now the dominant species.
Mm-hmm.
There's still quite a lot of really small objects which we don't really know what they are, unidentified. So,
okay. And can one small piece of debris really destroy an orbital satellite?
Right. So it's all about kinetic energy. So if you imagine taking a small piece of metal, I mean, you just take it and drop it on your foot or something. You're not going to kill it. If you launch that piece at the speed of sound, it becomes a bullet and can obviously cause a lot of harm. Now, if you take this piece and you launch it at an orbital speed, which I said is, 7.5 kilometers a second, that has considerably much more energy because energy is proportional to velocity squared, right? And now if you imagine a head-on collision with that piece, you flying in this direction, like 7.5 kilometers, that thing flying the other direction, the velocity is odd. So, instead of looking at 7.5, you're looking at 15 kilometers a second.
Yeah. That's velocity. Yeah.
That has a lot of energy and, more than enough to basically make the satellite explode. Basically. Okay, it will probably depend on where it hits. And it just goes through the empty space inside the satellite and then just leaves a hole on both sides, or whether it hits a big component, which then causes a lot of energy to dissipate into the structure and then the whole thing. That's interesting. That's maybe an interesting side remark, but there are actually tests where they have been tested and people still do those tests where they launch projectiles at really, really high speeds at mock satellites to try to understand how those explosions and collisions happen, and those things can destroy. And we've actually tested this, and we've seen this in orbit.
Yeah, and I guess it's all data, right? So when they've done the tests on Earth or out of Earth, in whichever orbit, collecting that data will help us understand what the impact is, how to mitigate it, and if it can still be operational after an impact or where that impact has struck. So yeah, it makes complete sense. Could we reach a point of no return?
Right. So the point of no return in space debris is quite often referred to as the Kessler syndrome. So this is the paper I mentioned, but actually it's from 1978. I'm looking at my notes, not from the 60s, which is titled "Collision Frequency of Artificial Satellites: The Creation of Debris Belts Around the Earth." So the whole idea, the premise is that there's so many pieces of debris that they keep colliding with each other and generating more smaller fragments, which keep colliding with other debris, creating even more fragments, etc., and it becomes a self-fueling cycle of collisions, like collision cascade. It's referred to. For a very graphical demonstration of what it might look like, I would recommend you watch a film called Gravity with Sandra Bullock. Came out 10, 15 years ago. I don't remember.
Great film. Great movie.
Right. So, the film is science fiction, but this whole problem of space debris and the Kessler syndrome is grounded in scientific work. Well, frankly speaking, it might be, okay, for sure what is presented in that film is too alarmist, and I don't think this will actually ever happen, at least not at the time, because there's simply not enough space debris. So we're not in a sort of Jenga situation where, we've got this entire tower of bricks and you pull one brick out and the whole collapses. Similarly, we are not yet, in my personal opinion, in a situation where, one collision happens, generates some debris, and then all the other things start exploding. So I don't think we're quite there yet. That said, it is definitely, all collisions are problematic and because they generate more debris, which have the potential to create even more debris later on. So it's more of an incremental process, and we just need to keep paying attention to it and try to mitigate it early enough so that we don't have a much bigger problem further up the line. Again, here the analogy to greenhouse gas emissions probably helpful again.
Yeah, prevention is better than the cure, as we say. And then also, I've obviously mentioned we reached a point of no return. You mentioned obviously the film with Sandra Bullock, Gravity. Now, going on to the next point is cleaning up space. Obviously, you're part of this new area, this new technology. Obviously, the audience would love to know what we're doing in the cleaning up space business.
Okay, I just had one extra thought about the previous point, if I may. So it could be that, by some measures, we already reached a point of no return. So I did tell you that we've got like 100 million pieces, smaller than one or larger than one. Realistically, nobody's ever going to be able to clean that up. I don't think anyone will actually pay attention to this because, we've got much bigger problems and much bigger pieces of space that we need to remove. Okay, so right now, the way people see this is, we've got those massive intact pieces, dead satellites, dead rocket bodies, and so on. And so the main focus is on removing those because they have the potential to generate millions of pieces later on if they do collide or explode. which kind of brings me to debris removal. So currently, as I said, we are building a satellite to go and remove one of those pieces, and other companies are looking at this as well. So these are going to be precursor missions that will go and try to remove those objects. Primarily as a demonstration, and we hope that further on follow-on missions will remove even more of those objects to try and prevent at this point where collisions start to happen, millions of debris get generated, and so on. All of those
Right.
missions are typically robotic based, so details vary, but they typically carry some robotic arm or several arms and some end effector or gripper that will just go and grab a piece of space debris or a big intact piece, and then the spacecraft will kind of pull it out of orbit.
Yeah, what I've got in my head as a fan, I've got someone shooting lasers that vaporize the object or harpoons. So there's no lasers vaporizing stuff or harpoons at the moment.
Well, actually, both harpoons and lasers have been tried. So there was a mission a couple years ago called Remove Debris, built by Star Satellite Technologies Limited, if I'm not mistaken, which did demonstrate harpoons and net in orbit. But eventually, this technology is not being used right now. So we'll have kind of opted for robotic arms instead, because those are one of the reasons is because they've been used for decades now.
And it works. Yeah.
And they work very well. As for lasers, there are also some initiatives to try to use lasers, not to vaporize things maybe, but to try and use the light pressure or the pressure of the material evaporating from the surface of the debris to slow the debris down.
Ah, okay,
The European Space Agency has an interesting project about this called Omelets, which is basically using powerful lasers to try and move pieces of junk in orbit without actually physically touching them with anything.
Love it. Right, okay, we are touching on time here, and we've still got a few things to go through. So, what ideas excite you the most?
Well, it's totally biased, right? Because I work in a company trying to build technology.
Let's be
Obviously,
biased.
that is
Let's be
pretty
biased. Come
exciting.
on.
That is pretty exciting. Yes, that this technology did not exist 15 years ago. And that's a satellite that can actually go and see through a window in the That's very, very exciting. That said, removing debris is not enough. So, we need this mitigation to really pick up the pace as well. It's been getting better over the years, steadily, but we're still not there yet. There's still, satellites, as I said, satellites being left on orbit, rocket bodies being left on orbit. We need to really try to get our act together and better at this. And frankly speaking, neither prevention alone nor mitigation or the debris removal are sufficient on their own. I would say they're both necessary. Actually, I did publish a couple of papers back in the day, and also some of my colleagues. Here, I'd like to maybe quote my former PhD colleague, Adam White, who's also published some papers on this. And, you cannot really rely on one or the other. So you kind of need both mitigation and remediation or debris.
And my question, obviously, others as well, about the kind of moral compass on this is: should satellite operators have a legal responsibility once the mission ends?
Well, that's not really something for me to decide or a way on. But as an operator myself, I can tell you that currently, if you want to launch a satellite, you need to present a plan of how we're going to mitigate the regeneration whilst launched. So, if you want to launch a satellite from Japan, you can go to the Japan Ministry of, I don't remember which exact ministry gives the licenses. In the UK, you have to go to the UK Space Agency and so on. And you have to demonstrate it. And you've thought about the problem, that you're not going to, produce any debris, and you're going to do your best to make sure that the satellite does not stay in orbit for longer than it has to. And that basically you're going to be a responsible person and responsible operator. So in a way, this is already being legally enforced.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I guess there's some governance, and obviously the overwatch by whichever, if you're in Europe or if you're in US, depending where it's governed, obviously Japan or Asia. I guess it depends which territory you're under. But obviously the governments, that's why we have a government. Some may agree or some may not agree, but governments do, on the whole, do a good job for us. They do keep some sort of order and some sort of overview of what good should look like. Whether we get there or not, that's touch on that. Well, in fact, you have actually touched on that a bit. So I don't know if you want to get into that or if you want to get to the next topics of conversation.
Yeah, maybe just very quickly. So we did talk about space debris removal, and that's space debris remediation, that's called more holistically. But this is really just one aspect of this whole problem.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's really just a space debris removal, active debris removal is part of this much broader field of on-orbit or in-orbit services, which could entail things like refueling, repair, upgrade, life extension, relocation. Going back to this analogy of a motorway, it's like, imagine that you have a car and you're driving and then all of a sudden it runs out of fuel. Then, you're not going to just leave it there on the side of the road or in the middle of it and just, go your own way. You're going to go and try to have it refueled and keep using it. Same, if something breaks, don't just throw the whole car away and you just try to fix the piece that's broken and just keep using it. But with satellites, we don't actually do it right now, which is kind of insane, but that's kind of how we've been operating forever since the Sputnik 1. So, and this whole idea of bringing in-orbit services is about trying to improve the sustainability of spaceflight. And in fact, every mature industry has some service infrastructure. So it doesn't matter if it's ships, if it's aircraft or whatever. We need some sort of way to maintain those things. But for space travel, it's going to be missing. And that's a huge commercial.
Love it. And this is for the audience. So obviously I'm in the recruitment business. So people who get in contact with me for their careers, obviously are going to want to know from an expert's point of view. So one of the questions is for someone watching this who's dreaming of working in the space industry, what skills would you recommend they develop to potentially take the next step into the space aerospace career path?
That's a very interesting question. And kind of depends where you are in this career or where you are in life right now. But for sure, I think, you start from this in previous episodes. I will not kind of repeat this too much. But, space is very rapidly growing markets, very rapidly growing industry. So, and there's plenty of room for all specialties, ranging from doctors, biologists, even historians, lawyers, just about anybody, not just people in STEM per se. So that's for sure there's a very broad spectrum of people that with skills that are useful.
Yeah, great answer.
Skills, as for skills, I don't want to risk, recommending one thing or the other, especially now with how quickly things are changing and how many jobs are kind of being replaced by AI and so on. But I think there are probably skills that are going to remain useful for the future.
Love it. Right. Okay. So, my question that I'd love to ask, Mythbusters time. So what is one myth about space debris that almost everyone believes, but simply isn't true?
Right. All right. This is an interesting one. I've been pondering about this for a while, but to be fair, I cannot think of any myth related to space debris that people believe because I simply, I see those things kind of as they are.
Yes.
I suppose, so there are some people who believe that Earth is flat, and that's one myth that people believe.
Yeah. We could have a conversation about that for a lifetime, but I went down the rabbit hole about this many years ago. But yes, it's very interesting the way that it's a sphere. It looks like a sphere, but still people say it's flat. But again, that's a different conversation for
Right.
And a quick fire round. These are questions to yourself. So whatever comes into your head first, Earth or Mars?
Oh, definitely Earth. There's no lakes, rivers, forests, fields, beaches, seas, and so on Mars. So yeah, I'm no brainer.
Yet. No.
Or anymore.
Yeah. Oh, and very good. Very, very. Yeah. I love that way of thinking. Let's be a quick fire round. We could be speaking about it for a long time because then we'll start talking about Star Wars in the distant some many years ago when obviously there was apparently life many years ago, but it's all disappeared. Right, okay. Quick fire round. Question number 2: satellites or space stations?
Why choose? I don't know. I think they're both have their own purpose.
Love it. Coffee or tea?
Coffee, 100%.
All the time. Book or podcast?
Books.
Love it. Love it. I'm going to have to write a book about this, and hopefully it'll be as entertaining as well. Early bird or night owl?
Airy bird.
Love it. Favorite space mission?
Again, completely not biased, but the mission that we flew as Astroscale the last couple of years ago, Albert J.
Love it. Absolutely love it. One technology you're most excited about?
Yeah, I was wondering about this one for a while. I don't actually know whether, I mean, I would not think, if you ask me this question more generally, I would not think of anything that applies to space debris off the top of my head. I would think of more space-enabled things like drug discovery, drug manufacturing space, maybe direct air capture of house gas and things like this.
Yeah. It's whatever comes to your mind. And if you could solve one challenge in the space industry tomorrow, what would it be?
Space traffic coordination. So I did say that, all constellations are trying to avoid collisions as much as they can, but there's definitely a breakdown of communication between different groups of countries, and there's literally no information exchange, and it's city dangerous. Like this lane, the motorway driving without paying attention to what's happening in the other lanes. I mean, that's going to cause a problem.
Exactly.
We definitely have to solve.
Yeah, I agree. Completely agree. So, final thoughts. If our audience remembers one thing about today's conversation, what would you like that message to be?
Right. Okay. So there's only one thing to take away from this is that, this realization that space debris is a growing problem. It is absolutely 100% possible to tackle it. And there are people and companies working. But what we really need to, get around together and try to solve this, which somehow, everybody can have an impact on by, applying the pressure to the government and to the companies and pushing them to try and tackle this problem. Let leave it for aside forever.
Love it. Absolutely love it. And obviously, thank you for bringing this subject topic to light for the people as well. So just close it off. When can people follow your work? How can people get hold of you? Is it your LinkedIn profile?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is definitely the best way. I don't use any other social media
Yeah.
post, but like yourself, you reached out to me on LinkedIn, and that's the best way. I'm always happy to have a chat to, talk about ideas, help with research and things like this. That definitely is more really always.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I really, really respect, honor, and appreciate your level of education, your focus, what you've done, your commitment, and your true excited nature in the company you work for. I can literally feel the passion. And as I said, I'll keep this very short. I'm in the recruitment business, and I speak to so many people who are unhappy with their jobs. And it's always a delight when I speak with someone who is not only passionate about the job, they love what they're doing and they're spreading the knowledge as well. And that's exactly what you're doing. So I really, really do thank you for your time today, because you've given your time to me, to the audience as well, to speak about that. And this shows obviously you're passionate about what you did. Before we close, is there anything that I've missed that you would want to say before we close off for this podcast today?
no, thanks a lot. So I think we kind of covered all of the topics that I wanted to touch on, and I think that should give people an overview of what space debris is about. So thanks a lot for preparing this podcast and making this opportunity to share, and also kind of this agenda and driving the discussion. I think that's super.
Thank you so much. So closing it off, thank you so much, Aleksander, for your time today. Guys, tune in, like, subscribe, and share. Thank you very much, and have a good day.
Thank you.